It's no secret that Thomas & Friends has had a lot of episodes. From its first series in 1984 to its 24th in 2020, the show has had 584 episodes.
Counted them myself.
And its community have openly stated their thoughts on what episodes they think is good, mid, or absolute shit that they forgot to flush down the toilet.
Disgusting!
But the latter is one that I'd like to discuss, because when I see people state what they think are the quote-unquote worst episodes of the TV show, particularly when it comes to the classic series, these 3 episodes always keep appearing as many fans call them out for being bad or rather weak. But after watching these episodes for myself, I've come to the conclusion that these episodes, whilst I can understand why people rank them lower than others, I wouldn't say that these are downright bad. So for this video, I'll be looking at why these episodes are so hated, give my personal thoughts on them, and respond with an episode that I think is worse than that. These are 3 Thomas episodes that are overhated, those episodes being Better Late Than Never from Series 2, Middle Engine from Series 6, and The Old Bridge from Series 7. In recent years, especially on Twitter, I've noticed a lot of hatred towards Series 2. As for where I stand, Series 2 is not peak Thomas, but I still think it's really good. The sets are full of life, the characters are stellar, Ringo's narration was great, even if Carlin was better than him in some places.
Just look what you've done to our breakfast!
And above all, the stories were fantastic. For the most part. And that's where Better Late Than Never comes into the picture. Taken out for the fact that Christopher Audrey was rushed to write the story for the TV series to adapt, people put this episode down for being too slow, and nothing really happens. To some extent, I can agree. The opening scene does kind of drag, but my excuse is the Viaduct set and the Viaduct theme is still great. And the consist that Edward is pulling is very unique. But after that scene, the episode's pace picks back up. By the time we get to the scene with Thomas and James, we're pretty much 2/3 into the episode. The episode also very much relies on the dialogue and character interactions, which makes for some neat little character moments.
It's time we had another race. I reckon I could beat you now. Thomas let off steam loudly. Rubbish!
As well as this hilariously grim line from Thomas.
If we hurried across the viaduct, it might collapse, and then you'd have no passengers at all. What would you do then? Run my train on time, for one thing, retorted Thomas.
Like, Jesus Christ.
I feel dreadful, all upset inside.
Same, bro. My final reasoning to why this episode is good is how realistic it is. Think about it. Why do people like this show? One of the reasons that people will give you is that it's realistic. And this episode demonstrates that. It doesn't always have to be realistic with the portrayal of the trains, but also with the situations and struggles that are going on, as in reality, public transport runs late due to something like maintenance, and this can create an inconvenience for the passengers. So overall, Better Late Than Never is what I can describe as underappreciated. It has good character moments, the pace, while janky at the start, fixes up as it goes on, and the situation is believable. It's not without faults, like what was James bringing to Thomas, because it clearly wasn't passengers, and the opening of the episode does kind of drag. But those are just minor things, but it's far from the worst episode of Series 2, or even for the first 2 series for that matter. An episode that I think is far worse is Thomas and the Guard. I'm sorry, but I just can't stand that episode. I've stated my reason why I hate this episode on the Very Best of the Worst of Thomas series, but my reasoning was simply that it's just Thomas's train all over again. And it honestly feels like the Reverend Audrey wrote an episode for the hit era. And don't take that as a compliment, because it's not. Literally every Thomas fan out there points fingers at this episode for not only being the worst of Series 6, but the worst episode in the entirety of the classic era, with a badly structured story, the Fat Controller unfairly blaming Percy, and horrendous narration from Alec Baldwin. But then again, when is Baldwin not terrible in Series 6?
Where have you been? Snapped Cranky.
And yes, I agree, the US version is awful. But after rewatching the UK version, the episode is pretty decent. In fact, I found myself enjoying this episode. Firstly, because it was the UK version, Michelangelos actually gives a good performance and makes the viewing experience much more pleasant to the ears.
Help! Cried Percy. I'm not a truck. I am not like Percy, huffed James. I am not a middle engine and I'm not moving. And he didn't.
But narration aside, I can't deny that the story itself is fairly weak. Like, yes, Ari and Bert should have been punished, or just replaced with Splatter and Dodge. Henry should have been told off for knocking Percy onto the tipper's loading ramp. But when compared to the other bad episodes of Series 6, it's honestly the least worst one. I'll get back to that later. What I like about this episode is that the pace keeps going and doesn't feel dragged out. Even the beginning monologue about the engines wasn't drawn out. 20 seconds into the episode, the story starts. Unlike some episodes like Percy's Chocolate Crunch, where it takes an eternity for the story to actually begin, the tipper's loading ramp, while being ridiculously unrealistic, it's a neat little visual. To me, it's sort of a funny cause it's stupid reason. But the highlight of the episode for me is James. People complain about the ending, but I argue that it's a classic case of karma. As near the start of the episode, James teases Percy for being a middle engine, and what happens later? Karma comes to bite him back in the buffers, and he becomes the middle engine, and Percy teases him. Not to mention that this little scene is just perfect.
Pa, said James, thinking no one could hear. I could handle those diesels with bent buffers and a busted boiler. Then you will do Percy's run to the smelter. Yes, sir, said James.
Like, James knows not to fuck about with him. That should be on a t-shirt. You don't fuck with the Fat Controller. Overall, Middle Engine is literally what it says in the title. Mid. Whilst it is a clunky story, James is perfectly in character, the pace flows nicely, and the beginning isn't needlessly there. As for episodes that are worse than this, oh boy, Series 6 has so many to list. No Sleep for Cranky, Rusty Saves the Day, Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry, but the episode that takes the crown jewel, covered in human feces sprinkled with some flakes of mud, for worst episode of Series 6, or in my case, the worst episode of the classic era, goes to Buffer Bother. The whole episode is just Bill bitching and moaning about Ben's new buffers, the pace feels like it's about to grind to a halt, and not to mention that it's literally just a carbon copy of Twin Trouble, with the twin characters swapped, and the crash happening at the exact same time. At least I'm not frustrated watching Middle Engine. I feel like Series 7 gets a bit of a bad rap, especially with how it was treated in the US. But after rewatching a few episodes, and even watching some of the US versions for the first time, it's actually pretty good. You want a hot take? I prefer Series 7 over Series 1. Not to say that it's bad. I like to think Series 1 is like a grandfather. You like it, but he ain't all perfect. But back to Series 7, and the final episode for discussion, The Old Bridge. People hate this episode for one simple reason, and it always seems to be one reason only. Scar Lowy is out of character and shouldn't have acted the way he did in the episode.
There's one more secret I feel I have to share with you.
I did not care for Scar Lowy being out of character. Like, seriously, that's the only major gripe people have with this episode. And whilst I can see some substance to it, it's still very weak to make that the sole reason to shit on this episode. I can look past that character regression because the story and lesson was actually good. I feel the same way with a hit-era episode that'll definitely get me lynched by the fandom. Edward Strikes Out. Yes, I know, Edward is extremely out of character and acted like a right twat towards Rocky. But only because he was gaslighted by Gordon, and in the end, Edward realizes that he was wrong to believe Gordon, making the episode just fine, with a good lesson of don't always listen to others. Going back to The Old Bridge, there are other reasons why I like this episode. The set of the old bridge itself looks really nice. The fact Scarlo immediately goes to help Rheneas from the bridge shows how strong their friendship is. And as surprising as this may sound, Robert Hartshorn did a decent job with the score. In fact, I prefer the music he did for when Scarlo saves Rheneas from the bridge over Mike and Junior's one. Although I do love the rendition of the Scarlo Railway theme that Mike and Junior did here.
Thank you, said Rheneas. You were very brave to help me.
Also, people exaggerate how bad Michael Brandon's voices are for Scarlo and Rheneas. They're tolerable. You want bad voices? Just go to the CGI series.
Everyone says he's the most fun engine ever!
Ah, my ears! So, the old bridge? Honestly, this might be my favourite episode of the 3 on this list. Scarlo's character regression can be ignored for the well-conveyed moral, beautiful set, and different fulfillments for both UK and US dubs. Easily an episode that is way worse than this is What's the Matter with Henry. Thomas and Percy are also out of character, but what they made Henry go through was extremely uncalled for and really cruel. But that's literally it for bad episodes in Series 7. There are others like Trusty Rusty and Peace and Quiet that aren't great, but those are just below average at worst. Just goes to show that Series 7 really isn't that bad. At the end of the day, opinions are opinions, and people are entitled to have their own thoughts. But with these episodes that I just talked about, it's almost like there's a unanimous agreement that these are bad. Again, as we stated in the very best of the worst of Thomas, the reason we chose to watch Percy Saves the Day was because everyone says these episodes are the worst. But when we watched them, we formed our own thoughts. And the only bad episode from that release was What's the Matter with Henry. At this point, just go check out this series. It's really the best place if you want to hear mine and others' opinions on certain episodes and home media releases. But I made this video to shed light on these episodes, as I got tired of hearing everyone bashing on them, and after watching them myself, I don't think the same way as everyone else does. Are these episodes great? No, not really, but I don't consider these to be the worst episodes. Unless it's the US dub of Middle Engine.
Coal cars.
Oh, fuck off!